really need this for my notes, but like Margot, I'm just completely delighted to be here this evening, remembering Stephen and revelling really in the legacy that he's left us of thought, of integrity, and of forward thinking about what kind of Scotland we all want to live in. I come to Stephen's memory and to my relationship with Stephen when he was alive, and to reading this book, not from the perspective of a nationalist. I'm not like Margot. I'm not a nationalist by conviction. I'm a social democrat by conviction. I care for social justice above all, and I would vote for anything that seemed to be likely to deliver real social justice for ordinary people, and freedom and empowerment for them. And so, you know, I suppose I'm one of the people that Margot is describing, who have worked out that voting yes in next year's referendum is probably the best thing to do if that is your priority. But I'm standing here not as a person who wants to make a case for left-wing nationalism, but as a person who wants to make a case for a sustainable centre-left politics for the 21st century. And I think at this turning point in our history, that may mean Scotland striking out as a political community on its own. And I must say that I'm proud and pleased to have worked with people like Stephen all through the 1990s to make sure that we have a parliament through which we can begin to express those sentiments, and which will play, if there is a no vote next year, and which I hope there won't be, but which there may well be, then that parliament will be a vital, vital element in trying to rebuild a new sense of where Scotland can go after that, and indeed, of course, if there is a yes vote. So on that spectrum of existential nationalism and utilitarian nationalism, I'm definitely at the utilitarian end of it. But as David has said, I'm a theatre critic. It's not that I don't feel strongly about Scotland and its culture. It's not that I'm not patriotic about Scotland. It's just that I have come through 30 years of thinking and writing about culture and politics and the interface between them to know how complex people's identities are in any kind of modern configuration of any group of states or regions or whatever they live in. And I do sometimes feel British, particularly if you go abroad with a British delegation. You can just, you know, there's just all sorts of nonsense and cultural stuff and behaviours about meetings and stuff like that are sort of British, particularly if you've been in the trade union movement. I do sometimes feel British. I always feel Scottish. I certainly feel European. And I love having all of these multiple identities. And I suppose in an ideal world, I would live in a political structure that at different levels expressed all of them, and that was always my aspiration throughout the whole devolution campaign of the 1990s, to have these different levels of government, including the democratic one, which we never had before, and which fully expressed my Scottish identity. And I'm very, very wary of people who talk as if, and there's a kind of strain of Scottish nationalist argument, which we could probably argue about later tonight, which sort of poses Scotland as a sort of authentic nation, and Britain as a kind of false construction made out of sort of real nations that were forced together by an imperialist project. And I don't think that's right. I think nations are organic things. Scotland was formed, you know, way back in the early Middle Ages from, you know, a different set of units or understandings of identity, which eventually came together for the Kingdom of Scotland. The same was true of Britain when it formed itself at the beginning of the sort of imperial phase, and now it may be coming to the end of its life. But all of these identities should be understood and honoured as fluid, developing, human, dynamic things. And that's not to defend the state that the British state is in now, but it is to say that it is just a falsification of history, to say that the British state has always been entirely reactionary and always a false thing compared with the Scottish nation. However, when we come to the dynamics of the present debate, I've got to say that as a person who is a fan of the 1945 settlement in the UK, which thinks that the 1945 election, in which my parents brought me up to know all about it and why they voted Labour at the end of the war in which they both served, and what they hoped for from that victory, and what the Attlee government delivered for them, and the kind of Britain they thought they were building, When I consider all of that, and that moment which was not a reactionary moment in British history, a moment when Britain achieved something almost like a popular revolution through the ballot box in terms of social provision and laying the groundwork for some kind of social equality. When I consider that, and the nation I grew up in, if you consider the UK as the nation I grew up in at that time, I am now shocked and changed by the extent to which the parties of the Union no longer seem able to make any kind of progressive case for the nation that they wish to keep together. They do not seem, among all of them, to have anything that I would call a progressive project for this nation. All of them have surrendered to different degrees to a theory of neoliberalism, which I think since 2008, really, for anybody who seriously thinks about the state of the world, is discredited. It's not a way it's not a way of running markets, never mind a way of running a society that really has any sustainability. And yet we do not have a mainstream UK political party, unless you count the Greens, that is even prepared to say that, never mind to start the process of working out a social democratic strategy for laying down a sustainable political future for the 21st century, one which, for instance, allows at whatever level is necessary, and it could be international, global level, for the kind of redistribution of wealth that is essential if we're going to have anything like equality of opportunity, social peace, and any capacity to deal with the huge resource and climate problems we're going to face. So I am shocked by the reactionary nature of the No campaign. I thought at some stage they would get their act together long before this and produce something that looked like a positive and progressive project for the UK. And so far, they have so totally failed to do so that I've been reduced as a cultural critic to just examining all the time their language and their tone and finding it completely unacceptable. You know, if you hear these scare stories day after day after day, most of them are a complete insult to the intelligence, and even if they had any substance, which most of them don't, this is not the language of democracy, it's not the language of respect for the divergent cultures of this island, it's not the language of social equality, and above all, it is not the language of the empowerment of ordinary citizens. It's the language of shut up and behave yourselves, or we will take your money away, we will not defend you, and we will make sure that you are worse off than you are now. And I'm afraid when people talk to me in that tone of voice, I say enough is enough. It's not a viable defence of the Union unless you're addressing a population which is very frightened and has no self-respect. And I've been fortunate enough in my life and in my work as a cultural critic to develop a great deal of respect for Scotland, for its capacities, for its powers, and for what it might be able to do in terms of building its own future. There was a time when I would have liked to do that in companionship with the rest of the people of the UK, and I think as a social union we always will do it in companionship with the rest of the people of the UK. But I think the political structure we are in now is bust. I think the tone of voice of those who are defending it betrays how bust it is, and I think unless we have a yes vote next year, this conversation will not continue on the creative path that it's currently on. So I hope for a yes vote next year. I know the negotiation that follows it will be long and tough indeed, and far from simple. It will be the beginning of something, not the end. But nonetheless, I think it's the only way to go, to keep this conversation going, to make something happen that is not in the script of the bully boys who are currently addressing us from the heights of Westminster, and above all, to keep open the debate and Scotland's chance of playing a role in the debate about how to recreate social democracy in our time as the system which I think demonstrably in the history, certainly of Europe, has delivered the best results for the greatest number, the greatest empowerment, and the greatest lifting up of people to be able to fulfil themselves. Thank you.